The HR Stories podcast is brought to you by the team at HR Stories. The team at HR Stories helps businesses, nonprofits, and HR practitioners better manage the employee experience, providing the tools, training, and resources needed to get HR right. For more information, check out our website at theteam@hrstories.com. Each week on the HR Stories podcast, HR and leadership experts John Thalheimer and Chuck Smikian dive into the stories that matter most to you, our listeners. We have found that there is a lesson in every story. And now our host, John Thalheimer and Chuck Smikian. Welcome to the HR Stories podcast, where there is a lesson in every story. Employee edition! Woo woo!
Woo woo! Dun 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 dun.
We're doing the employee edition, folks.
People need to watch us on YouTube. They need to click on the video link and just see what we do, what we look like, how we react.
Every once in a while, Chuck.
My great hair.
Right? We spend every month, every episode, really talking to the HR practitioner, professional, director, manager, generalist out there. And we answer their questions, right? We answer their questions. They come in. And boy, do we get a lot of crazy questions. And I love that we get to help people get HR right. But this week, I want to shift the tables a little and answer some employee questions. And I want to know, Chuck, are you ready?
Well, I think, I've been doing HR for a long time. And I'm doing HR now every day at a company. I am the HR director, practicing HR director. So I think I've probably heard most of these, but I got to tell you, just when you think you've heard it all, something comes along. So shoot.
So here's my question for you. As a practicing HR director, do you think employees are coming to HR less because they have so many other avenues to look up information?
I think they come to HR more prepared.
Oh.
And I think they come to HR, or they don't come to HR as much anymore, John, because we are all so very accessible via phone and email. So they send emails and they send letters, and they are either being coached or they're finding stuff on the internet, and sometimes their info is just a little off. So you're like, okay, maybe you got that somewhere else. So I don't know. That's what I see. I don't see a lot of people coming to HR for just general questions unless it's policies and procedures. But I do see people sending messages to HR when they have a problem, and they're educating themselves a little bit more. That's what I think.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I think, and you say this a lot, and I have heard this from you, and I know in practice you do this as well. The importance of building those relationships up with employees is critical in the role of HR, because if you're not building them up, they're not going to turn to you as the source of information. They're going to turn to their buddy that works in another company. Well, this is what we do at our company. You should be getting paid overtime, blah, blah, blah. Right? And so I think that's probably one of the things that one of the things I coach new HR people on is to make sure they're building that trust up so people go towards them. Yeah.
No, building relationships, absolutely true. But HR needs to make sure they still are the go-to person to answer employee questions.
Yeah. Mic drop, right? That's it. They need to make sure that people feel comfortable with them, that they're going to come to them, right? And so I know you talked to, we talked about it on the podcast. I know you send your team out You need to meet them. You need to know who they are. They need to come to you versus me, right? And so kind of building that up, I think is really important on there.
Yeah. So before we get into our questions, we should make sure we're providing folks general information, can't specifically provide, any of the legal guidance because there are federal laws, there are state laws, local laws, regulations can change based on the industry that you're in. Some of this may be just my opinion, how I would handle it, John's opinion on how he will handle it, but we will give you the best possible information. Always check with your HR department. And if you think they aren't giving you the right answer, you want to talk to an attorney, perhaps, or their boss.
That is, ladies and gentlemen, our disclaimer. We know a lot of employees listen to this well as HR practitioners. And so we're answering these questions to the best of our knowledge, but there may be other things in there. All right, Chuck, are you ready for question number 1?
Shoot.
This is from Tiffany in Colorado. She asked, how do I know if I'm being paid fairly for my role? What do you think, Chuck?
Yeah, well, I this is something that I do get from employees thinking they were looking for more money, they'd like a raise, and they do research. Some of them do research on websites that inflate, and I got to tell you, for some reason, most wages like 30%. But companies set their salary based on the research. What is the fair salary in the area? When I say fair, what is the going rate for a particular job? Now, some companies like to lead the market. Some companies like to lag the market. Some companies like to stay right in the middle. Some may give extra perks and benefits, but maybe not a great salary. Back in the early days of my Walt Disney World days, Disney paid okay, but the best thing about working at Disney was the perks, the benefits, and those types of things, as an example. But you could do your own research on sites like ONET, O-N-E-T. And also there are laws out there, like the Equal Pay Act, that companies have to follow, or else they are in violation of the law. So there's no specific way. I mean, you could ask colleagues, you could ask friends. Sometimes people are okay with sharing that information. Sometimes they're not. The other thing is, John, you'd go and apply at other jobs, and when you get to the conversation, find out how much they're paying, and that'll give you an idea if you're that worried about it.
Yeah, I think that's good. There are a couple things that I'm going to call out. Mm-hmm. One, right? And so I want to be clear on this because you kind of just jumped through that. It's the company that gets to set the salary within reason, right? They get to set the salary, obviously above minimum wage for your area. Obviously, they have to follow the Equal Pay Act, but they get to set the salary. They're the ones in that driver's seat. That's correct, right?
Yes.
Okay. And so the other thing that I would, and you kind of alluded to it, but this is for the HR people listening, yes. Is that you, as the HR person for your organization, need to think strategically how you're going to pay. Like Chuck said, are you going to be on the lower side of the wage area? Are you going to be in the middle? Are you going to be in the high end? And it's all about strategy, right? It's all about budget versus talent and getting the best talent and doing that. So I think that's a good thing. And so for Tiffany, what I would say to her is you don't know unless you ask, right? You don't know until you go out and do your research and talk to other people in your industry, network, and find out what the right rate is for that. And you're going to get some good answer. You'll have a better understanding of where you are.
Yeah, it's such a sensitive topic. So many people believe that they're not being paid fairly. I run into it all the time, but it's an emotional thing. So, and some
About
people,
respect.
yeah. So it's a very emotional charged question, the
Yeah.
fair question. But I love it. And I'm glad we were able to at least tackle some suggested answers.
Yeah, that's good. All right. So it's question number 2. This is from Matt in Colorado as well. He asks, can I refuse to work in a hazardous condition? Bum, 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 bum,
Yeah.
bum.
Yes. Well, I mean, you have OSHA. OSHA says, you have the right to work in a safe, um, you know, area free from death or dismemberment or serious or critical injury. Uh, in good faith, you need to believe you are in imminent danger.
Oh, wait, before you go on, we may have employees listening to this
That
that
don't know what
don't know
OSHA
what
is.
OSHA is.
Yeah,
So,
so
what is
OSHA
OSHA?
OSHA is the Occupational Safety and Health Administration. They set a lot of the safety rules, policies, and laws that companies need to follow. And if there is a safety issue at work, a lot of times people may notify OSHA. OSHA may get involved. I know very recently OSHA's been involved in heat illnesses, heat sicknesses, and making policies and regulations on how to keep employees from being overheated at work, outside, things like that. So that's what OSHA does. So you do have OSHA protections if a company is legit and following along. But if you're asked to do something that you believe is imminent danger, or you haven't been trained on it, you believe you could be critically injured or perhaps, I was going to say terminated, but die. Okay. And a reasonable person would say, yeah, that's pretty dangerous. Then no, you don't have to do it. If you've been trained, if it's part of your job, if you are given the correct safety equipment, the safety gear, and the protocols, and it is your job to do that job, and you just decide, well, it's too hazardous, you need to have a reason to refuse that, because then that becomes insubordination. I mean, if the reason is these safety gloves are out of compliance, okay, there's a reason, right? But if you don't have any reason, then you might have to face an insubordination documentation.
Yeah, I mean, again, I think it goes back to our favorite HR saying, right? It depends, right? And so and so again, what OSHA says is, do you have good faith that you believe that you're in imminent danger? Like, do you think this is going to happen? Second question is, do you think your employer is aware of it? Would a reasonable person also think this is a hazardous condition? And what is the level of urgency? If somebody says, oh, by the way, next week, you're going to have to go down into the sewers and take care of something, that's not urgent, right? You can address that with your employer, have the conversations, figure out, do I have the safety things? Do I not have the safety things? Always have the opportunity to reach out to OSHA. I would go to your boss first and say, hey, I'm a little uncomfortable about this. I feel like this is unsafe. Can you walk me through what we're doing to protect myself and other employees? If your boss doesn't give you a satisfying answer, then go talk to your HR person, have that conversation, and then still then reach out to OSHA and have that conversation. But always use, one of the things I want employees to walk away with is HR is there, yes, to protect the company, but they're also there to help you navigate these kind of situations to make sure that you are safe in the work environment.
Yeah. One thing that comes to mind is something I dealt with in the past, on top of these buildings, whether it's at a theme park or a hotel, the air conditioning is out, or there's some problem with an air handler, it's up on the roof, the boilers, but now in Florida, there's lightning coming and it's within 3 miles. Okay. Get off the roof. But that's my job. That's your job to do the air conditioning, and you're trained to do that, right? But you're not expected and should be expected to be up on a roof handling metal objects on in a lightning storm. Okay. So that's an example of, once again, it depends, right? So,
right.
All right. Great. Yeah. Great question. I love that. Thank you, Matt in Colorado.
All right. Question number 3. This is from Julie in Nashville, Tennessee. I'm 13 weeks pregnant and work for a large retail company. Do I have any rights because I am pregnant?
Yes. Well, large retail company says there probably means you're covered under all the laws that are out there: Pregnant Workers Fairness Act, the Pregnancy Discrimination Act, the Americans with Disability Act, which pregnancy is now considered elevated to that of a disability. Look, not being fired just because you're pregnant, that you cannot be fired just because you're pregnant. Also, this has come up quite a few times. Some employers think they're being chivalrous. Some employers may have other, reasons, but they may take away responsibilities, reassign you somewhere without your approval or request. And those actions, just because they're afraid, oh, you're pregnant, you shouldn't be doing that, you shouldn't be lifting that. But if you feel like you can still do the job and you don't have any medical conditions beyond the pregnancy, and you could do, then it would be against the law to reassign you. So yes, you have lots of rights. You have the right, and I'll give you an example, to request an accommodation. If you're in a job that requires you to stand and you have maybe a difficult pregnancy, you need to sit every once in a while, and you request a stool, that has to be considered. You can't just outright say no. It has to be considered just like any other ADA, Americans with Disabilities Act request. So the answer in that one, John, is simply yes.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think under the Pregnancy Workers Fairness Act, which came out in 2023, it gives the possibility of getting accommodations for being pregnant or just after giving birth. And that anything that's a reasonable accommodation that's not going to cause undue hardship, you should be able to get. But I think the big one, and you talked about it right away, is that you can decide if you can do your job or not, or if you need an accommodation. And so you can't be fired. Oh, you're pregnant. Sorry, you can't work here anymore. Oh, I'm sorry, you can't do that responsibility anymore because you're pregnant. Now, if you come forward and say, hey, I'm worried about doing this, is there an accommodation that we can, then you can work with the company and figure out what that accommodation is. Definitely, again, checking in with HR, I think, can be really good. All right. Any questions for me, Chuck?
Well, how about if I just shoot the next question towards you? Like volley it back. Joel from Virginia. Because you're from Virginia. You're living in Virginia now. So
I am.
I'm going to throw Joel's question to you. Okay.
All right.
Yeah. So Joel says, I work for Amazon, and starting January 1st, 2025, they want me to be back in the office. Right. So they've given him some couple of months notice. So they want me to be back in the office 5 days a week. Can they change the agreement they had with me when I was hired, that I would only need to work 3 days a week? I guess he's talking about 3 days a week in the office, 2 days off. So what do you think, John? Can they do that, those scoundrels?
Yeah, and I think I think that one of the things we as employees have to understand is that our companies can change our work arrangement, our job description at their will. They could come in tomorrow and say, hey, Chuck, you're not going to be the HR director. We want you to be the food and beverage manager. Enjoy yourself. Make sure you do that really well job. So they can do that. So Amazon, it has in their control to make that decision. You also, Joel, being a person that works in Virginia, you have the right to employment at will, which means that you can leave at a moment's notice. Right? And you could be like, hey, I'm going to leave. I don't have to give a reason. I'm leaving. And I'm going to go work for another company that gives me that flexibility. And so it's really interesting to kind of play that out on a bigger thing. And now you have to decide, Joel, is it worth for you to do that? Right? And so you can make that there. Now, one of the things that I will say, Joel didn't get into this, but what if Joel was asking for an accommodation, right? If he was asking for accommodation because he had a disability, he would fall under the Americans with Disability Act, and then we would have to make sure that we get into that.
Yeah, right. Right. No, those are all good points. And it is, I understand it's disruptive and you feel like we made an agreement and there's a breach of trust. But if we're looking at the legality of things, unless there's a state or a local regulation, there's nothing saying that Amazon can't change that. We're all employees at will.
All right, Chuck, let's do this. Let's take a quick break. And then we're going to come back. I want to ask you about question number 5, because this has you written all over it.
It does. I just saw that. Okay.
And so let's take a quick break. And listeners, we'll be back right after this break.
Hey, it's Chuck here with the team at HR Stories. You know, in the fast-paced world of HR, you need solutions fast. We are introducing our new book, The Ultimate Guide to HR Checklist Edition, your go-to resource for navigating the complexities of HR with confidence and ease. Hey, whether you're an experienced HR professional, a student, or a small business owner, this book is designed to give you immediate answers to a wide range of HR challenges. You know, wasting time sifting through endless reference books, unreliable web content, countless YouTube videos, our guide cuts through the noise with over 80 actionable HR checklists that cover everything you need in the world of HR, from onboarding and performance management to legal compliance, crisis response. We've got you covered. Why is this book a must-have? Because it provides you with immediate answers, saving you time, helping you avoid costly mistakes, and it's an essential tool for anyone looking to elevate their HR game. So head on over to the Ultimate Guide to HR.com. That's Ultimate Guide to HR.com to get your copy of the Ultimate Guide to HR Checklist Edition. Streamline your HR tasks, stay compliant, and create a workplace where both employees and management thrive.
Listeners, you have been listening to the HR Stories podcast, where there is a lesson in every story. Today, Chuck and I are talking employee questions that we get from employees in the workplace. And what should we do about it? How should we handle this one? Chuck, when I saw this question come across, I had you in mind, and I'm going to ask it of you. Are you ready?
I am ready.
All right, so this is from Brianna. She works at a resort in Florida and asks, I work for a resort and they provide housing. Are there minimum living standard requirements for the apartment I am housed in? For example, do they have to provide appliances like refrigerators, stoves, and television? Also, what kind of privacy rights do I have?
Okay. All right. So, yes and no. I mean, look, if they just give you the equivalent of a hotel room with a bed and a toilet and a sink and a shower and a TV, but there's no appliances, there's nothing legally saying they have to give you appliances. Heck, I don't think there's anything legally saying that they have to provide beds. They could just say, hey, here's a mattress and a sleeping bag. But in Florida, okay, you do have to provide some sort of, air conditioning, right? There are certain things like if things break, okay, you signed on, okay, I got AC, I got running water, I got toilet. If things break, as your landlord, and that once again, depending on how this is set up, they do have to fix these things. But overall, if they're wanting to retain you as an employee and they're providing the housing, they're going to provide a decent living arrangement. I've worked in situations where we provide employee housing at a couple places. Usually we've provided apartments. Currently we provide more of a dorm style living. We do have appliances and bunk beds, and we do provide pest control and all that stuff. But if we didn't want to do some of those things, a dining room table, a TV, we wouldn't have to. Now, privacy, actually, there are laws that cover that. And in the state of Florida, because we are providing housing to employees, we are charging them and they are signing a lease. So even though we have the right to enter their apartment, let's say, we would have to give notice that we're entering for inspections, just like any other landlord. We can't just use the master key, walk in and say, what's going on here, unless there's some sort of imminent danger or some laws being broken. And in that case, we would contact the police. So there are some privacy rights in regards to that. Lots of privacy, more than you might think.
Yeah, so they can't just come, oh, we're going to come in and do the monthly inspection, or we're just going to knock in today and come in, and I'm your boss, so I can come in at any time. That's good to know. I think that helps kind of put that into perspective. And then getting back to the other thing, it's really that basic habitability, right? It can't be a broken down shed. It can't have, pests in it. It has to be livable.
Yes, right. Yes.
Right. And so, that's good.
And the other thing, John, is like, it depends on the setup. Like if let's say the resort she's working in has, okay, we're going to take a few of these guest rooms, take them out of service. They need remodeled. So we'll just put the employees in there and they're just going to, then that's a little different than if it's like, for us, we have a dormitory across the street from the property. We have small apartments across the street from the property. The employees sign a lease, they put down a deposit, and we charge them per paycheck based on payroll deduction. That's a little different than if they were living in the hotel as employees, but it's a hotel room. Employer can go in there because it's not. That's different. That's not a lease or an apartment.
Okay.
It's a little sliver of.
All right. I think I understand that. All right. Well, question number 6 is a continuation of the privacy thing. So this is from Henry, and he wanted to know, can an employer monitor his email, phone calls, computer usage? How much rights does he have to privacy in a role, in a job?
Yeah. He should have no expectation of privacy. And once again, there are state laws, local laws that cover a lot of this. But overall, he does, there is going to be electronic surveillance. There are, employers do have the right to check his email, his work phone calls, his computer usage. Yes, they can get him. And I have to tell you, somewhere in your handbook, Henry, you signed off on all this also. You may not remember, you may not think about it, you may not think you did, but you did. So make sure you read the handbook, and you want to know what your privacy rights are. What do you think, John?
No, I think you're right. And I think, again, I think one of the things is, again, reading your employee handbook. I think Chuck that's brilliant, right? It should be in there. And if it's not, HR people, please make sure you're putting it in there, right? And making sure that it's in there, making sure that, hey, this is what we'll do. That because literally anything that is the employer's part of the employer's business, so the property of the employer, right? And so think about this. Even the router that maybe you're logging on to Wi-Fi, maybe that's an it that they can go in there and look, right? That they have access to that. And so being aware of all those things, lockers, desk, all of that. I always tell people they should not assume that they have any privacy at all. There are exceptions, right? The bathroom, there should be some privacy in the bathroom. But pretty much other than that, there's really not any privacy at all.
Yeah, absolutely. Great question. Great question, Henry. John, I want to ask you a question. This is from Sabrina. And she says, how do I report harassment and what protections do I have? And that's such a basic question. And Sabrina, thank you for asking that, because I know even now, even with all the news coverage and all the laws in place, so many employees still don't know what to do. So John, do you want to take a crack at that one?
Yeah, and I think, I mean, again, right, somebody's asking this question. There's a couple things that come to mind. Number one, setting aside the legal aspect, setting aside there's an emotional component to this question, right? Because if somebody's being harassed or discriminated against in the workplace, there's fear, there's shame, there's lots of things going on that this person may be feeling. And so they need to know, hey, this is the path. So going back to my friends in HR, your employee handbook should have a clear policy of this is what you do. If you're being harassed or discriminated in our workplace, here's the steps that you take. We want to know about it. We want to make sure that we can deal with it, but we need to know about it, right? We need to address that in there. And so again, I think one of the things we look at, right, is what makes harassment illegal, right? When does it raise to that bar to illegal? And I think the words that we always talk about are severe and pervasive.
Yes.
And so it's not an offhand comment, right? It's not an offhand comment, Chuck. It's not a simple like, oh, somebody said something nasty to me once. It's when it's overwhelming. I'm there. Now, employees, if somebody says something to you nasty one time, you have every right to go talk to your HR person and say, look, that's unacceptable. I want you to note it. I know there's nothing you're going to legally you have to do about it. HR people, you should address that, right? It needs to be addressed in the workplace. It needs to be there. And so again, talking to your HR department is critical. HR people, we need to be aware. We need to handle it. One of the things that I hear, and this is mostly, some HR people will say this, mostly managers and supervisors, they're just kidding. Not a big deal. And Chuck, do you remember we told that story of a young gentleman? He was black, gay, sous chef, and I can't remember the restaurant he worked for. But his manager said, oh, they're just trying, you're fitting in, right? He's being harassed at the workplace. And the manager's like, no big deal. It was a big deal. The company ended up getting fined and in big trouble. And so it needs to be addressed. And so one of the things that I will say is, yes, take it to the HR department. But if you're not feeling comfortable, you can always reach out to the EEOC. And as my friend Chuck says here, it's really easy to fill out that form. And it's really easy to come forward and do that. The EEOC will address it.
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you for answering this question. And I see a lot of times, John, that if you are, and last week we talked about building relationships with people beyond just technology. And as senior leaders and HR professionals, make yourself available to your employees, and they'll say things to you. Things a lot of times you can head off before they become a big deal. My manager said this. My manager said that, and it may not be severe or pervasive, but in their world, it's like it's a little uncomfortable, or it's a little weird, or it's just not real professional. I mean, employees are savvy enough to pick up on that stuff these days. And so you do have protections, and you should report it to, well, your HR person or their boss, or go forward from there. So thank you for answering that. And we have one more question. Cannot believe it. This is our extended Q&A version, folks. Employee edition, and William is wrapping it up. And William says, hey, I recently developed MS, multiple sclerosis, and it's causing me muscle weakness, vision problems, and balance issues. I work in IT, basically handling any issues that come up for my employer. How should I handle this with them? How should I handle it with my employer?
Yeah, that's a good question, right? And I think this happens to not happens to a lot, but happens to individuals, and they are very concerned how it will be addressed in the workplace, right? And so we develop a disability. We don't want to go to our boss because we're afraid that that boss or that supervisor is going to hold us back, or is going to take our job away or fire us, right? And so the first thing that I would say, Chuck, is that you don't have to tell anybody. So you're not legally required, right? You're not legally required to tell them. However, you do have protection, right? Yeah. So under the Americans with Disability Act, anybody that has been classified with a disability, which means that they have a physical or mental impairment that substantially limits one of their major life activities, MS would be under that category. The company needs to go through what they call the interactive process to make sure that if accommodation is needed, you have that, right? And so again, when we look at this and we think, okay, so has MS, muscle weaknesses, vision problems, balance issues, is this ongoing, or is it happening at different points of the day, maybe once a week, right? And so going through that and being very clear what accommodation you're going to need going forward. So what I would do is, if I'm in this situation, if I'm William, I would sit down with my caregiver, my primary caregiver, whether that's my doctor or a specialist, and go, okay, so what can I expect? How often is this going to impact my work? And what would be reasonable accommodations that I can ask for? And then I would go to my employer and say, look, here's what I just found out. Here's how it's going to affect me. I'm going to take medicine, but there are going to be times that I could use this accommodation. Would you be willing to accommodate me in this way?
Yeah. Yeah. And, one thing, John, is you can't expect your employer to be mind readers in this. So if things start affecting your job and all of a sudden you find yourself being documented for maybe not doing something or something weird, you really should utilize the protections available to you. Do your research. Obviously, hopefully answering this question helped you or helped someone else, but definitely you do have protections, and we wish you well. We wish you well, William.
Yeah. And one of the other resources, this is for both HR and employees, is Ask Jan. So go to the website askjan.org. Tons of great information on there from the employer side, from the employee side. Definitely something to dive into. Go, all right, I got information. The more information you have, the more informed you are, the better this situation is going to go going forward. Boy, Chuck, we have a lot of questions coming in. We could go on all night, right? We could go on and on and all night. But I think we provided some really good information to our listeners.
Yeah, and I want to mention from an HR perspective, these questions are real. And we, HR professionals, need to prepare, make sure that we are doing the right thing for our employees, and well, we're prepared to answer questions like this. So if you have a question and you want an answer, you want our perspective, feel free to reach out to us. Also, we have a great resource called the Ultimate Book of HR Checklist Edition that will help you prepare for these questions. Everything's in the show notes: how to get hold of us, how to send us text messages, how to get the book, how to see a preview of the book. It's all below in the show notes.
Listeners, you have been listening to the HR Stories podcast, Employee Edition, where there is a lesson in every question. Thank you for listening to the HR Stories podcast. The material presented in this podcast is for informational purposes only. Chuck and John always recommend using an employment lawyer or HR consultant to handle any legal concerns or HR issues. We do our best to double check sources and make sure the information we are providing is accurate. We may eliminate or embellish without changing the basic narrative to make the story easier to understand. In certain circumstances, we may change identifying information to protect the innocent. The HR Stories broadcast is brought to you by the team at HR Stories. The team at HR Stories is designed to help anyone with HR responsibilities be better at managing the employee experience. To engage with us, go to the hrstoriesteam.com and learn more about how the team at HR Stories can support your business or nonprofit. Thank you for listening to the HR Stories podcast, where there is a lesson in every story.